Everybody, it's James here at Cookalo. Quiet days here, and we miss you all terribly. Hope you're keeping safe and well in your homes. And thank you as well for your ongoing support. We have, via Zoom, a master of wine called Michael Palij. Did I get the pronunciation right, Michael?
Yeah.
Good. I don't know how much you know about Masters of Wine, but there aren't many of them in the world, and they're considered the leading experts about wine in general. And Michael in particular is one of a handful of people who have a very deep and profound interest and knowledge of Italian wine. I've known Michael for quite a few years now, and he's a great guy. And so I'd like to pass you over to Michael, who can tell us which wines we're going to be tasting. Over to you.
James, thanks very much. And I'm just reminded that you and I, if you remember, we had the tasting in the diary at the end of March where Matteo Inama was going to come over and do the tasting, and all of those things, of course, are gone. And I was looking through my diary the other day, and it was on the 11th of March that I flew to Edinburgh and did a tasting there for, I don't know, 50 or 60 people in a, packed into a pretty small room. And just the idea now of, getting in an airplane, flying to Scotland, having 50 or 60 people in a room at once, all of those things are sort of dim and distant memories. And so we all have to work together to get through this time. And so I'm just so glad you've invited me to do this tasting. It's a real it's a real privilege to be able to do this and to share this with your customers. And so when we're going through the 6 wines, if you've got any questions, James, about them, I think otherwise I might just end up rabbiting on for half an hour or something. So if you've got any questions, then just interrupt me and I'll try and answer them to the best of my abilities. But yeah, Italy is my thing. It has been. My first trip to Italy was in 1991. I was a buyer for a small chain of shops, and actually we had a little deli component to them as well. And I was sent off on a buying trip to buy, of all things, Lambrusco. So if you remember that, those were the bad old days. And so I was off on my Lambrusco buying trip and just promptly fell in love, as I know you have as well, with, the people and the country. And my wife is British. I've not married an Italian, so perhaps I haven't fallen in love with the country quite as much as you have. But it's been a wonderful 30 years almost of working with the Italians and their wonderful wines and bringing so many of them to a wider audience. But we're not starting with Italy.
So we're not starting with Italy indeed, but just one question: how has Italy changed in all those years? Do you notice big changes, or does it stay the same?
No, I mean, massive changes, absolutely massive changes in terms of the quality and really the industry structure. What we've seen, the biggest single change would be a movement away from the co-ops, where you would have the grower who had, I don't know, let's say a couple of acres of vines, and he probably had a couple of acres of, I don't know, aubergines, or, a couple of acres of tomatoes, and he sold those to the co-op. So there would be a tomato processing co-op, and, he'd bring all his tomatoes in every year and they'd buy them, and he'd take his grapes over to the grape co-op. And of course they were paid by the kilo. And I remember back, particularly in Puglia, I have one abiding memory of being at one of these co-ops during the harvest, and there was a queue of vehicles, and what struck me was not the length of the queue, but the nature of the vehicles. So there was a guy, with a big tractor, with a wagon, sort of full of grapes, and there was a car where he put a tarpaulin in the back of his estate car and chucked the grapes in there. And there was one guy, and this is a bit I'll never forget, who was on a bicycle, and he had 2 panniers of grapes. That's all brought to the co-op. And they'd all go in the scale, and they get weighed. So this guy pedaled onto the scale. They weighed him, and he went round the other side, dumped his panniers into the hopper. They weighed him again, and they paid him however many lira it was for his grapes, and off he cycled to the nearest bar. So that kind of structure isn't there anymore. Many more people have bought bigger vineyards to achieve some critical mass, or just decided to bottle the stuff themselves. So the co-ops are still there. So the industry structure changed, and obviously the qualities increased on average. But I would say that back then, in the 80s and early 90s, you could still find great wines, just not as many.
Sure. Yeah. Fantastic. Oh, wonderful memories. But you're right when you say we're not doing only Italian wines today. And just recently, I've been branching out just a tiny bit into other countries. And so I think we'll start with the champagne, won't we?
Yes, yeah. So, so this is the first one. I'll just hold that up. So, this is a champagne from a very small grower called Maurice Vassal, and I think a couple of things to note here. So, it's Grand Cru. So the vineyards in Champagne are rated between 80 and 100%, and those that are rated 100% are entitled to the Grand Cru sub-appellation, if you like. And he's in a village called Bouzy, which is in the Montagne-de-Rance sub-region.
Great name.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's one of the villages. I don't actually know if it might be the only village, in fact, that's entitled to make a still red wine from Pinot Noir. So you can have Bouzy Rouge, and a lovely name. And this guy. So we needed a champagne in our portfolio. So I don't know. I'd say 80% of our sales are Italian, but we needed a champagne in the portfolio because it's one of those things that really no other country makes. Italy makes sparkling wine, obviously, with Prosecco, but it doesn't make champagne.
Sure.
So and this is Maurice's. If you want to see the proper farmer with dirt under his fingernails and forever in his fields, this is the guy, and he wonderful, real proper farmer. And I just think he makes delicious, artisanal, not too expensive champagne. At least 3 years on the lees for the non-vintage, and anything up to 7 years before release. So 3 years on the lees and then extended time in the cellar. So it comes out with an enormous amount of age on the lees and bottle age. And it's not 100% red grapes, but it's predominantly red grapes, and then there's a small percentage of Chardonnay in there as well.
So how would the time on the lees manifest itself in the flavour?
Yeah, so it's always kind of, I think, unappetizing to describe it, but with the second fermentation in the bottle, once the yeast has done its business and turned the sugar into bubbles and a little bit of alcohol, it dies and sinks to the bottom of the bottle, and then it just starts to rot. But that rotting of the yeast, the decomposition of the yeast, creates through what's called the réaction Maillard, which is the same reaction that gives you the toast character when you toast bread. It's the same thing. And it gives you this autolytic character. That's what they call it. And it is that kind of bready, brioche, toasty note, which you get on nice champagne. And you really pick that up here. So I think there's a kind of red fruit character, so the strawberry component to that, and then this richer undertone where you're picking up that. I'm getting quite a buttery note on this alongside.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Toasty and so on. And the other thing to say about Maurice Vassal, which is very rare in champagne, is he does not do the malolactic. So the malolactic is this sort of second fermentation, which reduces the acidity a little bit. And I love acidity. And so this has got a really, really good acidity, which allows it to age so well. Sure. So it's very much sort of my type of champagne. And I like old champagne as well. The French are less keen on that. But I'm a big fan of that sort of fully mature champagne. And that's what I like about Maurice.
Yeah, me too.
So,
I think acidity, dryness in champagne, I really enjoy.
And that's lovely. Really, really fresh, good length. And I think with champagne, people are always drinking champagne at a moment where they're not analyzing the wine. And I think that's why some of the big producers get away with pretty average stuff, to be fair. And because you're getting married, you're getting divorced, whatever it is, but you're not really paying attention to what you're drinking. And so tasting it like this is great, where you can actually focus on what's in the glass. And it's got that lovely mouth-watering lemony acidity, which if you're having it before,
it's absolutely fantastic. Really juicy, lemony, as you say.
And so you're having this before a meal, and it's just what you want. I'm always aware that there's this sort of American predilection for serving cocktails before a meal. So you've got all this sort of sweet fruit juice and stuff, which just closes off your stomach. It's the worst thing you can do. Whereas this, that bracing acidity sets you up, makes you hungry, makes you salivate, makes you want to have something to eat. So it's a great,
as well.
So great aperitif champagne.
Sure. I'll recap on the prices, but this Champagne Grand Cru from Boozy is £36.45. Okay, now the next one, I thought probably the Cincinnato Bellone first, if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are going to Italy now, aren't we, Michael?
We are going to Italy. We're going to Lazio, so about 60, 70 kilometers south of Rome. And the story behind this is I was actually in Piemonte, and I was going around one of the wineries there, and the woman said to me, she said, there's another group a group of professionals, so it's exactly the same tasting as what we would have given you anyway. You know, do you mind joining them so we don't need to do it twice? And I said, no, sure, that's absolutely fine. And one of the chaps in that group, so the professional group, they were all wine producers from Italy who were going to Barolo to explore the area. And this chap was from Lazio and was a producer of Bologna. And I tell you what, he just would not let me go. You know, he found out I was a wine importer in the UK, and he was just impossible to dodge. So I made the mistake of giving him his business card, and then it was endless emails and phone calls. So eventually, I mean, to shut the guy up, I decided to go to Lazio. Went to see his estate, tasted his wines, and really couldn't see what the fuss was about. But anyway, you know, I'd learned about a new grape variety I'd not heard of before. And on the way driving back out up to Rome to Fiumicino, to the airport, I passed this winery, and what struck me about it was a hotel. So they got a restaurant, a hotel, and then the wineries underneath. And so I stopped in there. Food was insanely good, beautiful hotel, blah, blah, blah. Asked them a bit more about it. And it turns out, so it's a co-op. So just what we were talking about earlier about these, you know, so this co-op was established just after the war, and particularly established to preserve two local grape varieties, Bologna and Nero Buono, which are dying out. And they're dying out because they're susceptible to all kinds of diseases, very thin-skinned. Nobody wanted to grow them anymore. And so these group of growers got together and said, no, we don't want to lose these. We don't want to lose this heritage. And set up the Cincinnato co-op. And so tasted the wines. And I have to say, this has turned into a huge, huge seller for us. It's just lovely. So the grape variety is Bologna, which you can see here. Only grows in Lazio. Castore from Castor and Pollux, just sort of the fantasy name for the wine. And the producer is Cincinnato. And before we taste this, James, how much is this?
This is £10.95.
Yeah, so this is a highly affordable white wine.
It's a fantastic price for it. Yeah, we do a mixed case for £60 as well. So mix red and white, which in whatever quantities. Yeah, it's absolutely superb. Yep.
Yeah, and talk about over delivering. I really think this is wonderful, and it's unoaked, and we'll keep coming back to this. But you know, I'm not a big fan of oak. I think oak, you have to use it very judiciously. And from time to time, it's okay, and it can add something to the wine, but balance is the key. And far too often, producers think, oh, yeah, well, a little oak's a good thing, so more oak must be a better thing. And then the oak takes over and you don't taste the fruit. So I'm not a big fan of oak. And this is unoaked, just stainless steel, 2018 vintage, 100% Bologna. And it's just a cracking wine. So that nose is that lovely mix between sort of stone and tropical fruit. So you can find some pineapple and guava, but you can also find peach and nectarine. So it's sort of fully ripe without being too ripe. And then there's that kind of herbal dimension to it, that sort of fennel aniseedy note as well, underpinning that.
It's delicious, absolutely delicious.
It is. There's a lot of almond or hazelnut note on the finish. And again, lovely length, great balance. That's natural acidity. It's not acidified, all natural acidity. And okay, it's not the fullest bodied, richest Australian Chardonnay. It's not as aromatic as New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. But, you know, those kind of wines are extremely difficult to match with food, and this is extremely easy. So you can put this with any kind of fish, shellfish, appetizers. It's perfect. And it's not going to dominate the food.
What I love about it is we can say more than just one thing. The two grapes that you've just, or the two wine styles that you've just named then, when you're talking about them, really there's just one characteristic that dominates them. Whereas with this wine, we can talk about it in multi-dimensional terms. It's got a lot of character and a very distinctive flavor profile. And as you say, a great food wine. Yeah,
and I just think that, you know, wine is so exciting. There's so much out there to try. And, you know, New Zealand, there is good New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, don't get me wrong. But, you know, the stuff which you see in the supermarkets piled high on the gondola ends, you know, there's always an offer on a Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc. And you really think to yourself, you know, everybody who's buying that, you already know what it tastes like, right? Before you go home, you're like, yeah, I know that's going to be that sort of blast of gooseberry and tin sweet corn on the nose, and, you know, and but who knows what Bologna is going to taste like? Nobody. It's kind of quite exciting, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. Fantastic. Okay, now the next wine, I think, if it works for you, it's the Soave di Stefano Inama. You were talking about earlier, Matteo Inama was due to come and talk about his 10th birthday at the end of March. Sadly, that didn't happen, of course. But the next best thing, we have at least the wine here. So I think you and Stefano go back quite a way, don't you, Michael?
It all started here. So I was talking about my first trip. I was on this Lambrusco buying trip, and so it was arranged back in the day. There were these organizations who were funded by the EU, and they would take buyers from one country and put them in touch with sellers from another. And the whole thing was paid for. You just had to turn up, flights, hotel, everything, and you were sort of, you know, whistled around. And it was at the Grand Hotel in Rimini. And all I can tell you about the Grand Hotel in Rimini is that it may have been grand at one point, but sure as hell wasn't grand when I got there. And there's a big ballroom, and it was chaos, right? Everybody was smoking. You couldn't taste a thing. You couldn't hear anything, the din of people chit-chatting. And you go to a stand, there'd be nobody there, right? So eventually on day two, a number of us complained and said, look, this is just chaos. So on day two, they introduced this sort of speed dating thing. And the bell went, and you went to your stand, and, you know, you had 10 minutes or whatever to chit-chat. The bell would go again, and you'd move on to the next one, which was an improvement, you know, because somebody would be there and, you know. Anyway, the wines were dreadful, just undrinkable. And I got to, it was pretty much the last stand. And at this point, I was just holding out my glass, not even saying anything, because, you know, I just didn't want to be there. And so Steph said to me, he said, before we taste the wine, he said, I want to show you my vineyards. And I said to him quite flippantly, I said, well, you know, go ahead then. Where are your vineyards? So he said, oh, come around the back. And he had one of those old slide projectors, you know, where the slides dropped in. And there were pictures of his vineyards. And he said, you know, this is what we're doing. So, it's a bit weird. And then he poured me a glass of this. And I'll never forget that moment. And I smelled it. I said, what is that? And he said, it's Soave. And I said, no, it isn't. Soave is disgusting. And it comes in a 2-liter jug. And I drank too much of it at university. And Steph said this immortal line, which he said, this is Italy. He said, we have Fiats and we have Ferraris.
This is definitely a Ferrari.
Absolutely. So, and then Matteo, I remember not quite when Matteo was born, but almost. And now Matteo's taking over the estate. So how old does that make me feel? But it's wonderful to see. Matteo's great, but Steph's one of my best friends for sure. Yeah. We've been through a lot together. He's a wonderful guy. And, you know, we started this journey together because, you know, I was his first, he just started bottling wine, right? His dad sold everything in bulk. So he just started bottling wine, and I just set up my business. And we've been on this journey together, and it's been, you know, it's been wonderful.
It's crazy, isn't it? How fate can bring you together sometimes.
Yeah, it's been great. I still speak to him every week. But don't you love this? It's, you know, it's chamomile, elderflower, iris, all these kind of weird field flowers. There's a little bit of a kind of peach and stone fruit, but it's really a floral grape variety. This is 100% Garganega in stainless steel again, and all sourced from Pergola vineyards in Suave Classico, and all planted on basalt soil.
Could you just explain what a pergola vineyard is?
Yeah, so normally if you look down on a vineyard, normally the rows would be in lines. So the vines would be planted and then the canopy would be trained up vertically. And it's not like that in the Veneto. So the vine's trained up and then it goes out in all directions. So if you look down on a pergola vineyard, rather than seeing the rows, you just see a sea of leaves. So each vine sort of looks like an umbrella. And then the grapes hang under that. And the purpose of that is to shade them from the sun because it can get very hot there.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Fascinating.
Yeah, and I love this one. And so in terms of food, we kind of moved away here, but this would be my go-to risotto, pasta, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we drink a lot of it at home. Probably more than I should. They got all the profits.
It's just beautiful. It's really finely crafted. It's long. It's aromatic. It's and the other thing is it's 12% alcohol.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
these days the alcohols are just going mad, aren't they? So 12% is really refreshing.
It's lovely and soft as well. It's got this real delicate feel to it on the palate.
Yeah. Mm. Yum.
Absolutely delicious. And so the Soave Classico Campo de Tovi is $15.95. Next, okay, now we're gonna leave Italy once again. I can't believe I'm doing this, but you introduced me, Michael, to Alex Pflüger.
Yes.
A young German winemaker, and he gave a really interesting talk at one of your tastings a couple of years ago, especially about his biodynamic growing and winemaking philosophy. And his wines, I think, are absolutely superb. And in particular, I've been looking for a really good rosé that has both flavor, character, and doesn't cost a fortune. And they're surprisingly hard to find, really. I find some rosés that are soft and flabby and over sweet, and then some good ones that, you know, are in excess of £20 on the shelf.
Yeah.
But this is $15.95, and I think it absolutely hits the bullseye in terms of from its really, really pretty color. It's a really eye-catching color. And so I've been really enjoying it lately. So maybe you'd like to tell us a few words about the growing region and the grower and the wine.
Yeah, so first foray into Germany was over a decade ago. So once you get your MW gong, then there's sort of nowhere else to go in the wine world in terms of qualifications. So, you know, I'm keen on doing as much continuing professional development as I can. And Geisenheim University offers a course every year. And, you know, the topic will change. So one year might be botrytis and another year, you know, methods of making wine, sparkling, whatever it is. And it's great. So always go to that. And then the last day they take you on a little bus tour and they take you off and you taste a bunch of wine at different estates. And that's really well organized, as you can imagine, as well. So we're doing that for a number of years. And what I realized in Germany is that, you know, we have this perception, kind of like Italy, that what Germany is about is sweet wines, Liebfrau milk, Pease Porter, Niersteiner, you know, all this sort of stuff, which was inexpensive. And it was a sort of default position in the 80s for Sunday roast, you know, Black Tower, Blue Nun, whatever it might be. And it was always, you know, that kind of mold. And the reason why was, of course, Germany was so cold that they couldn't get the grapes ripe enough. And so the acidity was insane. So they dumped loads of residual sugar in and you know, blah, blah, blah. But actually what's happened is since global warming's come along, Germany is the net beneficiary of that now, you know, Germany's producing wines with, you know, 12.5%, 13.5% alcohol. They're dry. they're fully ripe. And of course, a degree or two change in average temperature for a vine is massive. So one of the guys I met was Alex Pfluger, and he'd taken over from his dad. So his dad was organic, for a long time. Alex then sort of moved that up a gear and became biodynamic. So he's one of the few estates organic and biodynamic. And don't forget, much more difficult to be organic and biodynamic in a cold climate than a hot climate, because in a hot climate, you don't have much disease pressure anyway. But of course, in a cold climate, you do. So he's in not a super prestigious area. So he's in the Rhine-Pfalz, and he's in a town called Dürkheim. And there's some good vineyards, so don't get me wrong, but it's not super famous like the Mosel or the Rheingau. So the prices are good. And he specializes in Riesling and Pinot Noir. And this is 100% Pinot Noir.
Is there much Pinot Noir? There's the bottle. So the Blanc de Noir by Alex Pfluger, 28 we're drinking. Is there much Pinot Noir grown in that area, or is he a bit of an outlier in that regard?
It's an area in Germany where there is quite a lot of Pinot Noir, and it's been planted for a long time. Now, because prices of Burgundy have just gone crazy, there's more interest now in Pinot Noir from other parts of the world. But he doesn't advertise this as, because he makes Pinot Noir, obviously, which he labels as Pinot Noir. So he doesn't advertise this as Pinot Noir, but it is 100%.
Yeah, and he calls 100%. It Pinot Noir instead of Blauburgunder, doesn't he?
Yes, and he does then. So if you want if you like the full fat Pinot Noir, but it's expensive, but compared to Burgundy, it isn't, and it is delicious. Yeah. So he does a couple of Pinot Noirs. So anyway, so this is the rosé, 12% alcohol, and as you said, I just think it absolutely hits the spot. So lovely color, and so many rosés are that kind of really like tutti fruity, candied fruit character, really estery, which I just cannot stand. And this has got some really classy aromas to it. So wild strawberry, raspberry, plum. It's not super pronounced. It's not a big blousy wine.
It's lean and fine and complex. I love it. It's great.
Yeah. Nice length. And think about the versatility that has with food. I mean, think about all the things you can put that with. You can put it with chicken, you can put it with ham, you can put it with duck, you can put it with goose, you can put it with charcuterie. Yeah. It's endless what this would go with, because it's got that bright acidity, and I always think with matching food and wine, what you want is that the wine supports the food rather than covering it up. So you want the wine to do this sort of windscreen wiper thing where you have a bite of food and the wine cleanses your palate, and then you want a bit more food and you want a bit more wine, and so it goes, rather than the wine being the main event, so that you don't really pay any attention to the food. So this sort of wine, like the Bologna and even Staff Suave, are just, they're brilliant in that kind of supporting role.
Yeah, sure. So Alex Pfluger's Rosé Blanc de Noir 2018 is $15.95.
That's good. Oh, that's good. Delicious.
So the last two wines are a pair of Chiantis. That I lived in Tuscany for a couple of years, and obviously there are lots of different types of Chianti. Which order would you take these in? I noticed that the Colli Fiorentini, which is this one, is a little lighter in colour, in terms of and a little lighter in alcohol as well. Which way around would you rather do them, Michael?
I do La Pieve first.
La Pieve first, okay.
Yeah. So this is the La Pieve Chianti. It's 2017. It's organic for what that's worth. And it's just straight Chianti. So if you looked at a sort of Chianti hierarchy, top of the pyramid would be Chianti Classico. And that would be the bit, if you got sort of Florence and Siena, and you drew a box out to the east, that sort of be Chianti Classico. And then dotted around that are all the Chianti satellites like Colli Pisani, Colli Fiorentini, and so on. And then around that, sort of at the bottom of the pyramid, if you like, would be Chianti, okay? And that's what La Pieve is, but it's from a town called Montaione, 500 meters above sea level. This is planted at the top of the hill in an east-facing sort of natural amphitheater. And this is made from a very traditional field blend. So it's mainly Sangiovese, but there's all kinds of other stuff in there as well. So Canaiolo, Ciligiolo, Mamolo, and even some white grape varieties, which have been planted there for donkey's years, and they still use those. And then the other thing that's interesting about this is it's in cement. So it's fermented and aged in cement, and I love cement. Providing you keep the cement clean, it's brilliant. Really holds the temperature during fermentation, so less requirement to cool it, so you don't get the sort of, you know, sawtooth temperature graph. It's nice and smooth. It's not an expensive wine, and I think it's brilliant. We saw gallons of this.
Yep.
And I don't, you know, people always want to hear exactly what the fruit character is. You know, is it plum? Is it blackcurrant? Is it blackberry? And I'm always hesitant because it's so subjective. And honestly, you know, wine is always made from grapes. So in a way, if you ever say anything but grapes, you know, you're being pretentious. But this has this sort of lovely, honest, earthy quality to it. You know, this is black fruit, blackberry, plum, and this earthiness, almost a sort of forest floor vegetal character that just really takes me to Tuscany. And, you know, all those fond memories of eating bistecca fiorentina and, you know, washing it down with lashings of Chianti. And it's a, come on, you live there. It's a simple life, right? Life is good in Tuscany. You know, you don't,
Sure
you know.
Yep.
Ah,
It's great. Like you say that, I think honest is a fantastic way of describing it. That earthy, slightly spicy quality to it that is just thoroughly enjoyable. Really, it's unpretentious and honest.
yeah. And, you know, stick that with some dead animal and, you know, you're away. I mean, it's just what you want. I think it's delicious. It's a delicious glass of wine.
Yep.
How much is that bad boy?
$14.95.
And worth every penny. It really is wonderful.
I agree. Also, $14.95 is the last wine, which is also a Chianti. This instead is a Chianti Colli Fiorentini. So that's from the eastern edge of the Chianti zone that you were describing earlier, isn't it? So it's southeast of Florence in the direction of Arezzo, I think.
Yeah, and north of Chianti Classico, and quite high. So the interesting thing about this is the altitude. And so this is Torre Acona. Torre Acona is the name of the estate, which has been there since the time of the Medicis. And if you read underneath, it says it's the property of the Conte, the Count Rossi di Montalera. So the Rossi there is the same Rossi as in Martini and Rossi. So if you remember back in the day, it wasn't called Martini, it was called Martini and Rossi. And in the 1930s, they sold that the Vermouth brand to Bacardi. And the Rossi family bought this estate with the proceeds of that sale. So it's a huge estate. It's very, very beautiful. But they have a tiny amount of vineyards. They have 19 hectares, so about 45, 50 acres of vineyards. So given the size of the estate, not very much at all.
But presumably they farm other crops in that case, or is it animals or?
They have some cereal crops, and they have, as so many Tuscan estates, they have the little podere, the old farmhouses, because it all used to be done with sharecropping, what they used to call mezzadria. So they have all of those, which are now agriturismos. So actually, when you go to taste, you can taste in the main building, but they often take you down to an agriturismo to cook lunch and to taste there. So it's big business in farm holidays, and this is a beautiful estate to stay. And this is, again, ultra-traditional blend, mainly Sangiovese and a little bit of Canaiolo. And it's a kind of, I don't know, I want to say sort of slightly more aristocratic, refined expression of Chianti. And I'm not sure honest is a word you'd use to describe this in quite the way that you would La Pieve. So it's lighter, fresher. Fruit character is more red fruit than black fruit. again, look, this is driven by Sangiovese, but it's a completely different expression with a kind of much lighter touch.
Yeah, it's hard to say without taking anything away from the previous wine, La Pieve, but maybe it's a bit more elegant than where the Pieve is agrarian. This Torre Corna Chianti Colli Fiorentini is yeah, a little bit more elegant, perhaps a bit more refined, and that doesn't detract anything from the previous wine, because sometimes you're looking for different things.
Yeah, stylistically they're really different, and that's why we list both of them. But I think, you know, if you think about the food match, I don't know, I think maybe, you know, with the La Pieve you'd want something like, you know, probably beef or game, but this I can see playing the kind of Rioja role.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of Rioja with that sort of, I don't know, slightly lighter, more attenuated, but still really complex style, and maybe with lamb or something. So
Yeah.
pork or lamb with this one, and then one before beef or venison or something a bit more hearty.
Yeah, sure. Great. Well, that's some fantastic wines you've talked us through. Thank you very much, Michael.
A pleasure.
I'll just recap if you don't mind. So we've got the Champagne Grand Cru by Maurice Vessel, £36.45. We've got the Bellone, which is Lazio IGP or IGT, I can never remember. Bellone being the name of the grape, that's £10.95. Then we had the Soave Classico by Stefano Inama, which is £15.95, followed by the Flüger Blanc de Noir Rosé from Germany, and that's also £15.95. And then we finished with the two Chiantis. They're both £14.95. The first, La Pieve Chianti DOCG, £14.95. And the second is a Chianti Colli Fiorentini, and that also is £14.95. Yeah, some really lovely wines. I'm doing, if you want to taste these wines at home over a couple of evenings while you're watching this conversation, then we can do a special price for you. The full case price would be £110, and the discounted price would be £90. So we can do this case of 6 wines for £90. Yeah, and it just remains for me to say thank you once again to Michael. Michael speaks all over the world in the wine world. So we're really privileged and very, very pleased to have been able to welcome him to little old Cuccolo in Heathfield.
I used to speak all over the world. Now,
now you've got 2 kids.
I'm rather stuck at home, but James, it's just been such a delight to work with you over the years, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you very much again.
Cheers.